impromptu recording in the middle of my blue-green Omnitell league. I'm once again playing against Lewis CBR, notable legacy grinder, and last time we played he was on Temur Delver. I have no reason to believe he's still not playing that deck. Also, if you look at the trophy list, he's usually like in the top 10, top whatever. You know, not unreasonable to assume he would still be playing the best deck in the format. So, on the play, one that I roll. Let's actually hide the game log. There you go. Okay. Reasonable 7. Even if I was on the blind, I would keep this as enough cantrips. Knowing he's on Temur Delver makes Tropical Island a little uncomfortable, but obviously that could be rectified. And of course, Ice Fang Quaddle is very strong. Brainstorm to the bottom. It's a little redundant. Mystery Rainforest on top, because the fetch goes very well, of course, to fix my hand. Opponent leads off with their most terrifying turn 1 play, the Delver. So pressure's on. Thankfully, Ice Fang lines up well against it. Draw Impulse for turn, and decide I'm not going to play Ice Fang into Daze. So I decide may as well just play around Stifle. I don't think he has it because that's a fringe card. And he, just I feel like the better Delver decks don't play Stifle, even though Stifle gets me a lot. So whatever. Apparently Stifle is not that good. Makes sense. Stifle's not that good when you're behind, but it's very good at keeping yourself ahead. I decide to put back a Tropical Island and my worst cantrip, i.e. Impulse, because Wasteland and also keeping double Show and Tell is actually okay for game 1, because you could just jam them back to back and try to get Force of Will out of your opponent, but game 2 that doesn't really work because they bring in Surgical, or they can, and you should just play around that. But no need to play around Surgical in the first game. Alright, the Delver reveals a Force of Will. So as soon as I can play around Daze, I'm probably just going to jam Show and Tell irregardless, just to get Force of Will out of their hand. Force of Will and another card, right? And there's the Wasteland, which makes me glad I ditched the Tropical Island. And here come the turn 2 beats. Alright, draw a land for turn, so that makes my job easier. And in fact, I decide here just to hold up Ice Fang. Again, I play on Stifle. Didn't really need to, but I knew what my next play was going to be anyway. Like, I wasn't going to cast Brainstorm and Ice Fang to play around Daze. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to Ice Fang no matter what. To keep the pressure off and get a favorable trade. And between me having double, like just blue-green basics, and the opponent either remembers from when I played before or could have Googled my past trophy finishes, would know, it's very likely that I'm on blue-green Omnitell, and I wouldn't fault him for knowing without even looking it up based on how I've played. So I am feeling pretty good about this Ice Fang resolving, because it's not something you want to force when there's a Show and Tell waiting for you. And yet he doesn't force it, and of course no Lightning Bolt mana, so I got the trade. Alright, draw another Show and Tell, which is The third one's a bit much, but I decided to jam. It will also show me whether or not he has Daze, and he does not. So whether or not I play around Daze in the future, so you lost a life, telltale sign of Force of Will. Not having Daze kind of makes me feel a bit more comfortable about how I use my mana in the future turns, and I was happy to trade a Show and Tell for Daze if they had it, because I have 3, but very happy to trade for a Forceful and a Ponder, especially when the opponent looks like is hurting on their colors. And then here comes, I believe it was Mandrills or Goyf. I think it was Mandrills, yeah. So more threat, but again, they don't have days. They don't want to force. I decided to brainstorm, look for my next lands, and unfortunately don't find a fetch, but that's okay. These show and tells are starting to look kind of dead, but at some point, not quite now, but at some point I pivot to using them just as force food since I've drawn Uro. And I actually decide to Ice Fang on the upkeep to play around him top decking a spell, and if he has like something that interacts, he has to spend mana on his turn. Wasn't super necessary, but he's kind of priced into attacking anyway, into the Ice Fang just to try to get me dead. Unless he has red, but again, struggling. He's struggling to find his colors. Yep, no shuffle. And no red. He offers the trade, I'll gladly take it. And now my hand is set up actually to run away with the game with Uro. Which resolves easily and does its thing. And in fact, I draw a Preordain to help me move my hand along. Whoops. Revealed land. I forgot what I revealed. It was land and something else. I can't remember. Oh, it was land and Ice Fang. And I was actually in the market. Yeah, that's right. I saw Vista and Ice Fang. I put both to the bottom because he didn't have any pressure, and my arrow was going to line up very favorably with more or less whatever he played, especially with Veil Summer to protect Veil Summer and Force of Will, either to protect it from removal, which probably would have been Oko if he had it. So I just wanted to find something to kill him with my Show and Tells. But despite putting despite putting Ice Fang, Quaddle, and Vista to the bottom, I drew another Vista, which is still it's fine. And here's the Oko. Yep. This I need to answer. So this is where I actually decide I'm going to turn these Show and Tells into force food. Oko was the only threat in his deck, only card in his deck that could really answer Uro. So I decided to play the Uro. And, you know, they force back. I wanted to hold up Veil for an Oko. Plus, actually, with Vista, I couldn't get any more green sources with Vista. My only green source left was Tropical Island, so I had to force there, and they just scoop. Died Uro beats. Their hand was probably really bad, especially with the Brainstorm lock. To a layperson that looked a little bit premature, they could top deck another Oko, but like, if they conceded, I believe they really knew they were dead, because again, Brainstorm locked with missing colors, and I'm at 12 life, about to go to 15. Yeah, so game 2, minor spoiler about how the match went, but it was a doozy of a match. Opponent's on the play, of course. Great 7 if it had mana, so I decided to keep and put back the extra Show and Tell, because now jamming Show and Tells is not good, because if my first one doesn't resolve, they can Surgical it and make the game a lot harder. Second Cutting Witch is a little clunky, but it's fine. This is perfect. Veil plus lands. Preferably not Trop, but that could be shuffled away easy. And there's their pressure. Good for them. And then pass the turn doing nothing. The way my hand's shaping out, I'm just thinking like I have to resolve the show and tell because my hand doesn't interact very well. I mean, I have a veil to protect my spell, but beyond that. And I believe their Delver doesn't flip. Yep. They play what was likely their draw for turn in the Misty Rainforest. Always thankful when the Delver doesn't flip. And I'm fetching because I'm like, yeah, I don't really want Tropical. Like, since their Delver don't flip, I especially don't feel pressure. I get double green for. I found it's always shifting Ceratops is can play such a huge role in these post-war games. Having double green to cast it is actually more important than having double blue. Double blue is more easily to get even down the road, and this was where things go south. Opponent plays Sylvan Library, and there's nothing I can do about it. And yeah, me being a combo deck, and my only way to pressure them was with Uro and shifting Ceratops. They might feel inclined to just take a bunch of life to draw a bajillion cards. I keep both. I think, yeah, I need the fetch. So this is a situation where double blue would have been nice, but again, it doesn't really change since they already have the Sylvan Library in play, and I can't combo off this turn anyway. But between the pressure from Delver, which I believe didn't flip again, and it did flip Lightning Bolt. They did crack the fetch though to shuffle it away. Between the pressure of Delver with the card advantage to Sylvan Library, I was feeling extremely pressured to try to go off probably next turn. Although they don't tap out, which is bad. It makes it much harder for me to go off, but opponent already drew 2 cards off Sylvan Library and was primed to draw a third while pressuring. And the pressure keeps going. So, you know, presenting a lot of damage in the next 2 turns. I decided to keep Brainstorm because it's better, much better than a random card. Like, I decided like, oh, maybe I could draw a Force, but I decided I'd rather have Brainstorm because it was very likely they had Pyroblast having Volcanic Island open, and while Veil of Summer prevents them from Pyroblast from countering my show and tell, it doesn't stop them from killing Omniscience. So I figured having Cunning Wish to find the kill and also Cunning Wish to counter the Pyroblast was probably my best option, and I decided to go for it. Playing around Daze to an extent. So they can't Daze the Veil of Summer without 2-for-1ing themselves, but they have the Force, and I'm just like, don't really have time to wait. What I could have done was take one more turn of beats, which would put me down to 8 between the Ice Fang and the food. So in hindsight, I think I should have waited a turn, and instead of jamming Show and Tell, which I do here, instead casting Cunning Wish to find Veil of Summer. Because the opponents only have 2 cards, although I think they just draw Yeah, so they drew 3 cards off of this total. Yeah, so that was a misstep. I should have used my life total resource a little better. And Cunning Wish for Veil. Although I top deck another Show and Tell, which kind of undoes the problems I was thinking about from last game, but the possibility of the opponent having Lightning Bolt, like it's very likely I'm dead next turn. So I'm like, do I play around Daze by playing Show and Tell without Brainstorm, or do I try to find a Force of Will? I think in hindsight, what I should have done was Brainstorm first, looking for Force of Will, because at this point, yeah, I would force a Daze. I would be happy to force a Daze if it meant Show and Tell resolved, because if they have Daze plus something else, it doesn't even matter. The opponent has Force Negation. Okay. Opponent cantrips and surgicals, my Show and Tells, and before surgical resolved, actually, I decided to scoop so he couldn't see my sideboard tech like the Ceratops and whatnot. Alright. You can see right now game 3 took a long time. It's a crazy game. Alright. Main reason I wanted to share this, game 3 was just so dumb. Or dumb? I don't know. Depends who you ask. Keepable. Again, 2 Show and Tells. Not very good. Post board because the surgical, which we saw last game, actually. But again, Brainstorm. Opponent doesn't have their turn 1 pressure for once, which makes me happy. And then I just draw a land, say go. Wasteland, which I can easily play around. And major cringe, Sylvan Library. That drew them 3 cards last game. And I felt priced into brainstorming. And not a bad brainstorm. Obviously was looking for Force of Will, but Carpet of Flowers is pretty good tech against Delver. So I put back Show and Tell, and I want to draw the land, have more mana. Alright, drew the land, gonna fetch shuffle away the extra Show and Tell, and I decide to go main phase Ice Fang. So the double green I remember is important for Ceratops, but I kind of have it now with Carpet of Flowers. So I want my more important color, blue, and I decide to main phase the Ice Fang using Carpet of Flowers mana, which also plays around Daze too. I forgot. Oops, I went for Uro. That makes sense. Ice Fang is better when you're facing pressure, which I wasn't quite yet. That's my mistake. I misremembered that. Drawing a second Omniscience was bad. What happened? What? Yeah, what happened?
Oh no, I was.
Okay. So let's see how many cards the opponent draws. I believe they draw 2. Like, they keep 2 cards, I should say. Yep. So, Sylvan Library card has drawn 2 cards. And then pressure. And I'm like, sweet. Ice Fang lines up pretty well against the Goyf. And they still don't have red mana. Main phase the Ice Fang to find a cantrip, which I do. And then use Carpet of Flowers to set up my draw for Veil of Summer. In land. Put the land to the bottom, put the Veil in hand to protect Show and Tell. So opponent draws their third card off Sylvan Library. Again, they just can't find their red mana, which is good for me. Definitely take the trade. So even though they have the card advantage engine over me, like I have 5 cards, they have 9. I do have the mana advantage as a carpet, and also having answered their Goyf, their turn 3 Goyf. Already they're kind of slow, and also answering it really bought me a lot of time, which is good. However, then there's Surgical, so makes sense. Take the Uro, which was going to escape next turn. Opponent goes to discard. Oops, sorry about that. Please stop. Downside what happened of replays. Quick overview what happened. So they surgical Uro, so I decide to go for show and tell with Veil Summer backup. So I decided to go for show and tell, Veil Summer backup. So cantrip to try to have enough mana since they gave me 2 mana thanks to my Carpet of Flowers. Had enough to like ponder. Plus, had enough to ponder plus Veil and Show and Tell. Try to find a Force of Will. Didn't find Force of Will. Perhaps prematurely decided to go for it because again they're not putting pressure on me, and their Sylvan Library kind of did all the damage it could. It draws their 4th card on their turn as we see here. Anyway, main phase Veil, which plays around soft counter magic like Spell Pierce and Daze, which they hardcast, tapped out Force Negation. Still playing around Daze, I decided to show and tell anyway, which they then Force Negation, pitching Daze. So playing around Daze was good. And then with my last mana, I decided to Brainstorm since I didn't have any action, and then they dazed it. So the turn was, I did Brainstorm, which resolves, then Veil, which opponent Force Negation, hardcast, and then Show and Tell, which the opponent Force Negation, pitching Daze, and then I cast Ponder, and the opponent Daze that as well. So really seeing the power of Sylvan Library here. Yeah, giving them lots of cards. And then now the opponent puts a threat. Kind of scary. I have basically a 0 card hand. And they're putting pressure even though I'm at 21 and no Uro. Brainstorm, of course, good draw. Try to turn this into action, my hand into action, and fail to do so. No fetch, no more cantrips, no payoffs, no show and tell or Eureka at this point. However, I decided to do something that I think my reasoning was the opponent probably doesn't want to counter, and they already spent 2 dazes, so I wasn't too worried about playing around a third. So what I do here is to buy even more time, much as I would have loved. To get Sublime Epiphany. Choose 1 or more, counter target spell, counter target activated or triggered ability, bounce a non-land permanent, create a token that's a copy of a creature you control, and then draw a card. I wanted to bounce the Hooting Mantles, and I could do that next turn with Sublime Epiphany for bounce draw, but I thought about it and decided to go for Echoing Truth. In hindsight, I think I should have gone for Sublime Epiphany, which I could have cast off of thanks to Carpet of Flowers plus flooding a little bit with Force of Will backup, but I didn't want to pitch probably one of my best ways to steal this game where I'm suddenly extremely far behind. So trying to buy time while the opponent doesn't have their mana developed to interact very well. Now, Sylvan Library stops drawing cards. All they're doing is using it to filter. The opponent also stops. And probably another reason they don't go to 1 is they're probably respecting me having another Ice Fang, but also they definitely saw that I had Shifting Ceratops would just kill them right now if I drew it, and they saw it because of Surgical. And then we're in an awkward position of doing nothing for several turns. So I just pass go. Opponent. So opponent did a cool trick there. Played a land, their 3rd island, which I was happy about because it helped me hardcast either Grizzlebrand or Omniscience. But then they wasteland, they float the mana, then wasteland themselves to deny me mana carpet because they are playing around. They know I'm Brainstorm locked. They know I have Omniscience Grizzlebrand. So that was a cool heads up play from the opponent to play around my carpet. And the Hooting Mandrills comes back. The Wasteland carpet also, Wasteland their own land also fueled Hooting Mandrills while playing around carpet, so I thought that was a really cool play. And then the opponent dazes, so they did draw their 3rd daze. Must have been their top deck return, because they didn't counter the Echoing Truth. Although Echoing Truth represented a 2 for 1 on myself, so maybe they were okay with that. Once again, pass do nothing. And I'm at 21, so despite me being in terms of board and cards way behind, I do have a lot of time. Well, relatively, like 3 turns maybe. What's going on with this? Okay, draw another land. In hindsight, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What I didn't do was play Tropical since I didn't want them to wasteland it. But in hindsight, I realized after this I should have played Tropical Island because it gives me 6, 7, 8 mana with Carpet of Flowers. So a top deck City of Traders is hardcast Omniscience. And they get our beats in. Again, a lot of draw go, but he has pressure and show and tell. So this is exciting. I first was going to wait a turn to try to find protection for show and tell, but then I realized that would put me to 9, and then Grizzlebrand wouldn't be able to activate on my turn because then they could just pulp me in response. So I decided, they have 5 cards anyway. It's unlikely I'm going to have enough interaction to stop them if they have it. So I decided jam. And they Pyroblast, yeah. And then, this is what I was talking about, Surgical, the show and tell. It was strange they chose... Oh, that's right, yeah. Since they forced negation my first show and tell, they couldn't Surgical it. But this one was good old-fashioned countered. So now my only outs... There are 3 life, so my outs now are simply 1 Eureka, 2 Shifting Ceratops, and that's it. So 3 out of 33, not great. And I spent 3 of my 4 Brainstorms, but I still had a number of Preordain and Ponder left. Actually, I only had 1 Ponder and 3 Ponders and no Preordains because I only have 1 Preordain post board. More pressure. probably the best card they could have drawn to continue the card advantage train, since they already have the power, the high power of Hooning Mandrills. Cunning Wish was interesting. Sublime Epiphany doesn't seem very good anymore, but I decide to go for it anyway. To find like Impulse, which I boarded out. Try to find something to kill them. They counter it with a Force. So they did 2 for 1 themselves, which is nice. Granted, it didn't really matter since they could recoup the mana lost with Dreadhorde Arcanist. So they've answered a Veil. They answered a main phase Veil of Summer, which is like a combo piece / threat on its own. They answered 2 Show and Tells. They surgicaled all my Show and Tells. They surgicaled my Uros as well. So they had to answer 5 of my threats. Granted, them answering all of it, I was able to keep off pressure for a lot of that time. So, it could be worse. And they go, land go. And then I draw a Carpet, which was actually, I would have rather, the best draw would have been Shifting Ceratops, but Carpet was interesting because not only does that generate extra mana, it now gives me a way to hardcast Grizzlebrand. And I realized this, so don't use Carpet on my first main phase, and hardcast the second Carpet. So then when I go to main phase 2,
Hello?
4 black mana, and here we go. Hardcast. Now I have just enough black mana sources thanks to double Carpet, and the opponent having 2 islands in play. Hardcast Grizzlebrand. So, again, they answered Veil of Summer, surgicaled my Uros, answered 2 Show and Tells, and surgical Show and Tell. And I have an unpyroblastable threat. All I have to do is fade an Oko. It's their only card now that they can win that can stop them from dying to my Grizzlebrand. And they can't really attack with Arcanist to find Oko by using cantrips, because then I just gain all the life. But they had Oko, which did the legendary, or rather turned my legendary, but the legendary play of Elking the Grizzlebrand. So I have a nice 3/3 Grizzlebrand Elk. Which, again, things couldn't have been much worse, but things could have been worse, because at least opponent can't kill me with Arcanist and Hooting Mandrills. I could chump it with my Elk Grizzlebrand, so that they answered 6 threats now. And again, now I'm in a position of I can hardcast Omniscience next turn. They have 3 islands in play, so that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 mana next turn, so it's a hardcast Omniscience. And hope I have something good on top. So they answered 6 of my stuff. They're at 1 life, so they decided to, as a result of the surgicals and fetches, and boom, Cunning Wish. And I'm like, if you have an answer for this, like you answered 7 of my threats, and I acknowledged how lucky the top deck it was, and the opponent points out too, but I was thankful. I realized it was lucky, but also glad my 7th threat finally won the game. So here we go. For the super legendary, hardcast Omniscience. Having trouble tapping my mana correctly. There we go. Cast the second one, and Can't fetch Grizzlebrand with the shared summons, but I can fetch Emrakul and Shifting Ceratops. And that's game. Opponent forces just to show they had something. Which is weird now that I think about it. Yeah, they had force, so they couldn't. Even though they did have an answer to my 7th threat. They did have the answer to my 7th threat of Cunning Wish, off of this Hardcast Shell and Omniscience, but yeah, that killed them. So Sylvan Library drew them so many extra cards, but the life loss added up, especially with double surgical and the fetches. Yeah, couldn't have been closer, and well played from Lewis CBR. I'm not going to deny I had a lucky top deck at the end, but also that he managed to answer 6 of my 7 threats is pretty nuts.